Hi, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dr. Rennie Joy, founder Alec Foundation, and we're here to discuss the topic of the role of corporate lawyers in making India a preferred investment destination. So India has reached a great milestone in terms of reaching $1 trillion of FDI investment since April 2000. And while there are policy changes which are facilitating these, there are also drawbacks like we've had October 2024 about $10 billion that got withdrawn through the FDIs and FIIs from the stock market. So of course, so corporate lawyers here, I think, play a very, very important role in terms of making investors understand the frameworks of the new country that they're working in, the policy norms, the ease of doing business, etc. At the same time, I come from a view that it should not be limited to this, but the corporate lawyer's role should be more reformed into getting into legal reforms and policy frameworks as well. Right. So I think between the discussion that I take with my fellow colleagues here, which is Kritika, Sangeet, and Arush, we will try to dwell upon this and take it on from there. So amongst the first question I would like to ask my panelists is, the legal framework and ease of doing business. Corporate lawyers help streamlining regulatory compliances. So Kritika, we'll take on with you your first view on this.
So what I believe when we're advising foreign investors is that we have to understand that every person who's coming from a different country comes from a different culture, a different mindset, the way they speak, the way they talk. Commonwealth nations tend to forget that many of their clients don't even speak English as their first language. And the way things are said, it could be so different. And so in a way, yes, there could be commonalities between the legal frameworks of different parts of the world, because how many times can you reinvent a acquisition transaction? How many flavors can you create? But what really changes is the the way approach in which something is done. Whenever I'm talking to someone, a foreign investor, especially in these times, who has only spoken to us online, never really set foot in India, but is ready to incorporate a company here, make investment, I tell them, have you heard of McDonald's? And do you know that McDonald's doesn't sell the same menu in India? In fact, if you go to McDonald's in France, they offer goat cheese. They don't offer cheddar cheese options. So you have to be prepared that whatever framework you've come in mind, whatever structure you've come in mind, you will have to McDonald's it a little, bring an Indian flavor, be flexible. If you tell me that, no, I'm not flexible, this is my international framework and this is how I'm going to go about it, then perhaps you should reconsider. So, and also one another thing that I tell them is about the scale. When someone comes from Europe or the US, the population scale that they are looking at, especially in transactions like fintech, is minuscule as compared to when you look at it in India. The scale, and you achieve that scale so fast, and it is still such a small part of the market that for them sometimes it can be overwhelming. And so from a legal perspective, I think what is important for an advisor is also to explain to the foreign investors, this is the legal landscape. But in reality, when you put it into play, this is how it's going to play out.
I think the demographic of what the country is about is also important.
Yes.
Coming to the next question in legal framework is also policies, legal policies in terms of laws like FEMA, SEBI. So Sangeet, you come from an experience of working in defense and aerospace, right? It is a very specialized field. And I'm sure when you are advising your clients to make them comfortable in a new destination, I'm sure you have to go through that, are there specific FEMA laws to follow or SEBI clearances which need, because these are complicated structures that one is working on, right?
Yeah. So thank you, Kritika. And before we start, see the title of the panel discussion is the role of a corporate lawyer to make India as an investment destination. So now coming to, I'll come to your question while I'm speaking on this and answer to it. So Reni, whenever we talk about making a country an investment-friendly destination, we have to analyze the ease of doing business ranking of that country. That is the most important thing, and that's how we start. And if you'll see, as regards ease of doing business ranking, we all know that World Bank index is there. So if we'll see where India presently stand now not presently because of certain internal issues. World Bank now after 2020 they discontinued with the index because of some internal allegations and all with respect to the parameters they considered to come at the index rating and all. But if we'll see the figures of 2020, which was the last index before they discontinued, India stood at the serial number 63, which was quite encouraging, and more so if we'll see the trend, India moved upward in the index. In 2014, the position was 142, and in 2020, rather the assessment was done in 2019. So exactly within 5 years, from 142 to 63, So this was quite encouraging, and I'm sure with the series of regulatory reforms happened after 2020, and more particularly with respect to the central government initiatives and the state government initiatives, we would have been positioned somewhere in 20, 25 or in the range of 20. But the index didn't continue. But having said that, Indian legal system is still very complex. And when I'm saying this, I'm not saying this in a negative sense. It will continue to be complex, given some of the dynamics that India as country have, including the federal structure, including other drivers which lead to the complexities of the situation. So it will continue to be complex to some extent. Now, as regards the investment, and to give an example to what I'm saying is about the complexities, I'll give an example. So if you'll see foreign direct investment policy, which is a consolidated and comprehensive document prescribed by the Department of Industries and Trade, DPIIT, under the Ministry of Commerce, Government of India. If we'll see the FDI policy, it's a comprehensive document, and this is the principal document whenever we talk about FDIs in India. Now, I'll take an example of defense sector. And as you mentioned, and as you know that I work in defense and aerospace sector, so excuse me for quoting examples from my practice area.
But I guess that's the most complex,
yes.
One of the most complex places.
It is very complex, and defense being highly sensitive, it is highly regulated as well. And because of the Make in India campaign that is undergoing, Atmanirbhar Bharat plan that we are going through, there are a lot of other regulations. And there is another factor that drives to the complexity of this sector, that is defense sector, because each and every defense product, there is only one end customer. That is Government of India. And the tri-services, that is Indian Navy, Indian Air Force, and Indian Army. Now, whenever Government of India is your end customer, all the acquisitions by Government of India will be regulated. It has to be by way of public tender. And in defense sector, because of Make in India campaign and all, we have a document called as Defense Acquisition Procedure 2020, which talks about different acquisition routes. And because of Make in India campaign, Government of India has initiated this strategy that whatever will be acquired by Government of India, there will be, the first preference will be given to an acquisition category called as IDDM, which is also called as indigenously designed, indigenously developed, indigenously manufactured. So the mandate under this document, DAP 2020, Defense Acquisition Procedure, is that if you are going to acquire, the first preference should be given under this route, and only if the technology is not available, indigenous technology is not available with the Indian industry, they can go for other acquisition routes, where foreign players can also participate. Now, because of this, it says that all the products should have indigenous content of 50%, make in India. And the entity participating in this tender should be an Indian entity, should be owned by Indian hands, and should be controlled by Indian hands. Meaning thereby, foreign shareholding cannot be more than 49%. Now look at the situation. Your comprehensive and consolidated FDI policy, which is the principal document, it says up to 100% in defense sector. If you are manufacturing components which do not require industrial license, and up to 74% if it requires industrial license. So what I'm trying to say is, in defense sector, under the automatic route, FDI is allowed up to 100%, or as the case may be 74%. But when you have to participate in the tender as an industry player, your tender document says that foreign shareholding cannot be more than 49%. So these are the complexities. And we as corporate lawyers, our role gets triggered, and the first elementary role for a corporate lawyer to make India as an investment destination is to simplify things, and it is our responsibility. Professional scope of work is to, elementary scope of work is to first educate the investor on the regulatory regime, understand their business endeavors, what they want, so that they don't land up in unpleasant surprises and all. So this is one of the elementary role. Apart from, we also owe this responsibility to the industry and the foreign investors to make things simple and to give solutions. Even if these kind of restrictions are there, that you want to invest, you want to come as an industry player, but 49% restrictions are there, but you have to devise the solutions. And there are solutions, instead of because obviously as foreign OEM, I will have reservations in investing in a company where I don't have the control, I don't have the ownership, because I want to transfer the technology to the JV company. I will have reservations in transferring the technology to a company where I don't have the control. So, there we as corporate lawyers, we have to devise, I'm not saying that, you have to manipulate things, but to give solutions on how to tap the market, at the same time being compliant. As regards other things, we have to address their concerns. Obviously, in a sector like defense, which is highly dependent upon technology, they are very sensitive about intellectual property rights. We have to, devise mechanisms so that their
I think
IPRs
the key is that
yes.
the corporate lawyer here becomes a navigator in terms of
Exactly.
understanding the policy and helping the client sail through safely into the new terrain zones, right?
So we have to upscale ourselves, and
Sure.
that's,
Now, I'll take
that's
my
what I
next
wanted
question
to
to Arush. Arush, with hearing such complexities in terms of getting the ease of business, getting into India, navigating the policy, I think one of the questions that every client is going to ask while the contract gets drawn is that what are the legal remedies available in case a dispute arises? Because I guess the entire idea of a contract itself comes from the fact, or a legal frame is, what if the dispute arises? India is complex, may or may not be similar to a lot of other regions. There are countries which operate on different laws altogether. Not everybody's on an English law, and hence, there'll be different aspects of it. So how would you go and advise a client there?
Well, I'm sure everyone's made out by the drift of your question that I'm not a corporate lawyer. So yes, that's a caveat I issue over here. I don't do corporate law, but yes, I don't think we can harbor aspirations of becoming an investment-friendly hub without, addressing the teething issues, or rather the issues that are that are currently being faced by our conflict resolution landscape as it stands today. India, as my friend here was saying, is ranking, when we are again dreaming about being the third largest economy in the world, our contract enforcement is still abysmally low. And in terms of our judicial infrastructure, I think most of you know over here we have over 5.1 crore cases pending in our courts today. What happens when we engage with engage in a cross-border transaction? The biggest hesitancy that is shown from the other side is that we don't want to take domestic legal recourse in India because we are scared that our prospects and good money will be languishing in courts, and we won't get we won't reach our end goal. So and even today, a decree executed by a foreign country, save and except maybe 13 countries where we have a reciprocal arrangements, are not readily enforceable in India. We still have to file a fresh civil suit where the order passed by a foreign court becomes a primary piece of evidence. So therefore, you still have to go to the grind of another commercial suit. That is where I think facets, different forms of ADR come into fruition. We've seen, I'm sure most of you who are interested in arbitration would have seen the draft amendments to the arbitration bill, to the Arbitration Act rather, which are currently, which is expected to be tabled in Parliament very soon. We need to give more focus on institutional arbitration, because that is what is going to increase the investor confidence in India. I don't think a credible foreign investor would repose so much of faith in the ad hoc process. And I say this with great respect. I do more ad hoc arbitrations in India because, numerically speaking, ad hoc arbitrations are the norm, institutional arbitrations are the exception. We need to turn that around. And of course, now we do have a very blossoming mediation landscape in India with the passing of the Mediation Act in late of 2023, where a mediated settlement agreement is akin to an award, akin to an order of the court, and can be readily executed. And the advantage what an arbitration and mediation have over the traditional court process is cross-border enforceability. A New York Convention country which has ratified the NYC will enforce your award as if it were an award passed in their country. Likewise in the case of mediation. So therefore, I think there are a lot of advantages, but we still need to do some cleansing, even in ADR, which is happening. I think some laudable initiatives are being taken, but without improving our judicial landscape, whether in form of your court cases or even in ADR, I think making India investment friendly or making India the third largest economy will remain a utopian concept.
So would it be safe to say that as a corporate lawyer, drafting a contract, any one of you could take that answer, drafting a contract, keeping the dispute resolution in mind, it's going to be a complex structure because you want the investor to come here, but you at the same time want domestic investments to go up as well. So there is domestic pressure in terms of doing what is coming into the country for yourself. So how would you manage that in terms of complex contracting?
Should I take up? Okay. So now I'm again quoting the same example, and we have actually, witnessed these kind of situations. So contract drafting is one of the most critical aspects, and more particularly when you have to devise a mechanism which will sail through the legal eye. So as I mentioned, in defense sector, if you are participating in IDDM, your foreign shareholding cannot be more than 49%. And not only ownership, but the control should also be with the Indian hands. So, sometimes we have to devise mechanisms that, okay, you maintain the same shareholding, but still you are able to tap the market without getting into the legal complexities. So for example, in one of the cases we did, we entered into the shareholders agreement. We incorporated the JV with the same structure, 51% with the Indian hands, 49% with the foreign shareholders. The company was incorporated. As regards the market participation was concerned, we devised it. So see, I'm a foreign OEM. I want to supply my product to the Indian industry. I cannot participate. There is no one stopping me from supplying the product on an outright basis to my JV partner. I'm okay if I have reservation in transferring the technology to a company where I don't have the control because I'm just 49% shareholder. I can, instead of transferring the technology or the IP to the JV company, I can supply the product on an outright basis. I have to, for IDDM project, which says that indigenously designed, indigenously manufactured, and 50% should be the indigenous content. The core component, bearing the core technology, I can simply transfer that product to my JV company in India. Obviously, I have to maintain arm's length and all those things. I have to comply with that. I will not transfer the technology. I will enter into a separate agreement, which will be called as teaming agreement. Under the teaming agreement, I will say that, okay, I'll supply the core component to the Indian industry. They can assemble it with the Indian subcomponents, some parts, packaging and everything, and they can still maintain that 50% indigenous content. If the value of my core component is 50%, 50% can be indigenous content. I'm not transferring the technology, I'm just transferring the product. I will enter into the development agreements, assembly agreements and all those things. I need not to, and I will enter into a separate agreement which will called as training agreement. I will tell the Indian JV players how to, assemble the things and supply the product. Still I am able to tap the market. I'm 100% compliant and things like that, So this is something which I want to add on. And
I wanted to add to that, because you see how complicated things can get, especially even for me, because we both work in sectors which are not just having foreign investment, lot of foreign interest, but also that they are regulated. Correct. Banking, finance, defense, they're all regulated sectors. And so you don't have a lot of flexibility because there is a regulator and he wants things in a certain manner. But when advising a foreign investor, and this is something I keep saying to my team as well, is that we tend to forget that contracts are a risk mitigation tool. It's very easy to take a draft, make changes as per the commercials given to you by the investor, and float it back to the client. Our job as people sitting in India is knowing what goes to court, and if it goes to court, what will happen with it. And it was very heartening for me to hear a litigator talk for 3 minutes about mediation. For me, I felt very great about that, And so we've been advising clients since at least 13 years that the first step in your commercial contract should be mediation.
I think
right?
alternate dispute resolution is one of the key to any contract, especially where we are looking at foreign investments. I think
Yes.
that is because the key is communication and figuring out interim routes, I guess.
Yes.
Still holding you on there because you also work with a lot of technology, fintech, etc. Right? So you cannot speak about FDI without speaking about patents and intellectual property rights, right?
Yes.
How do you keep the thought of the patents and protection of their rights in place, at the same time get them to invest in a new country and get the policies going? So how would you address such a situation?
Presently, when we advise clients on intellectual property rights, I'm sorry to say, we have a long way to go as a country, right? We don't have a lot of protections. And when you look at a transaction structuring, what happens is that he says, okay, so if I, as he said, if I transfer my technology or if I give my intellectual property on a license, how do I take back the money? Am I allowed to remit back royalties easily? How are they taxed? And those are the places where we get stuck, right? So what I always advise my clients who have precious intellectual property, and that probably works differently in the defense sector, but at least in other sectors, what I advise them is that you need to come with the mindset of having a long-term relationship with India. Don't expect that you will make money every year, remit most of it back, pump it back in. If you want to do that, then you should probably invest from, say, the International Financial Services Center. We do have an option for that now. And it is also in the process of creating a more dispute resolution friendly framework. But you're here for the long haul, right? Be a
While-
Bata.
Correct, but safeguarding the investor's interest would be important. So maybe Aru should take because this question in because I think when you're comforting them on safeguarding, you're in a way telling them how the laws are going to help you here in India and somehow support.
In a lighter vein, I think you spoke like a litigator. You're in it for the long haul. but, but yes, I mean, when it comes to intellectual property, yes, I don't think India is a very mature market yet. That being said, when it comes to the ease of filing, if I'm to look inwards when you are talking about ease of filing and the registration processes that are involved in registering trademarks, patents, etc., they have seen a trend of being more seamless as opposed to a few years back where you actually had to physically go to the trademark registry wherever you may be located and go through the objections, any opposition, see the journal. Now largely the interface is online. When it comes to the ease in prosecution, I think most of the prosecution issues, whether it's an objection from the registry that this mark or this copyright or this patent is in certain objection or is conflicting with another mark, I think even that has eased. There were times that we would have to go for appearances like akin to court appearances before a registry and plead before the registrar that this is not conflicting, the O is like this, the O is like that. But I think now that is all digitized. When it comes to litigation, it's heartening to learn that our very own High Court here and a couple of other High Courts have dedicated intellectual property rosters. Judges are hearing only intellectual property assignments, which is leading to a fast tracking of the cases, a good end result. Because normally, strategically, what happens is in a lopsided intellectual property case, let's say a big company, a big beverage manufacturing company wants to sue a smaller company for infringement of its trademark. They're going to be filing a suit for damages, infringements, etc. They will also file an application for interim ex parte relief. And normally, if the case is clear cut, you will get that ex parte relief, which will eventually be almost like an irretrievable relief, making both the parties come closer and converge towards a compromise. So that's a trend we are seeing. And intellectual property cases in our courts are actually, performing very well. The average time taken for an intellectual property case is far lower than, let's say, a partition suit, property suit, probate matter, even an arbitration award for that matter. So intellectual property in that sense is doing well. From the R&D perspective, yes, I think there are miles to go. But from an enforcement, prosecution, and litigation perspective, I don't think it's bad. I'll just conclude by saying one thing. There was a judgment of the Supreme Court. I highly recommend you all read it. Booz versus Hamilton, which actually held intellectual property to be a dispute or a remedy in rem, which means it was not arbitrable. But now that trend is changing. I think with the kind of domain expertise that an intellectual property needs, an intellectually property conflict needs, I think ADR could be the way forward as well. You may not need domain experts because courts have their limitations in terms of bandwidth of expertise. So I think dedicated ADR rosters could be the way forward. So yeah, that's what I wanted to
And
say.
also, thanks to the establishment of commercial courts acts and all, which is also, has fast-tracked many contractual disputes and all. Of course, I mean, IP falls within the purview of Commercial Courts Act. And yeah, so I can't agree more than, what you're saying. And
Great. So, Kate, the next point that any investor looks for while looking at investment into a new country or a new domain is incentives. So your views on the production-linked incentive, how would you guide, plus taxation, optimizing the taxation benefits? I think that's usually something that most investors look at. And how would you say a corporate lawyer can pitch in there and guide them while structuring the deal?
So again, when we are talking about the incentives of manufacturing and advising foreign investors, I would like to begin with a wish list and then go to what we really do. See, basically, when we talk about PLI or manufacturing incentives or those kind of things, things happen in a wave. If we look at international trade, if we look at international developments, they always happen in a wave. And for example, just like we were discussing yesterday in our pre-meeting, renewable energy, it boomed in 2010 outside of India. 2010, 2009, up until 2012, it was at an all-time high in Europe especially. And then sometime in 2012 to 2015, the wave caught up in India. And somewhere in 2014, it became, not feasible for foreign players who had high-tech technologies. They had brought down the manufacturing costs to its lowest possible, but it was just not commercially feasible for them to manufacture it in Europe. And they wanted to manufacture in India. And so at that time, they brought their technologies, they shifted their manufacturing facilities partly to India. It always also has political implications. So there's always India versus China, India versus Vietnam, you know. And so it's just when India is looking at manufacturing incentives, and I think Invest India is the best body to guide the government at this point of time on these kind of things. We need to constantly study and monitor what are the international trends, where is it going, and sort of divert our, incentives towards them. For example, right now we have high focus on electronics, and I think that's an amazing thing. Coming to taxation, again, I want to pitch for the International Financial Services Center in Gift City, Gandhinagar. If you're looking for a tax benefit, you want a Cyprus or a Luxembourg treatment, then we have IFSC in India now. You can avail, out of 15 years, 10 years, you can go tax-free. If you're an alternative investment fund looking to shift, you can shift your fund and not have capital gains. So it's not that India doesn't have these things. It's perhaps this quality, cultural quality that we have that we don't know how to project ourselves internationally. We're working on that, and I have hope.
I think that's where the critical role comes in, right? Where
For
I
us as
started off by
well.
saying it's not just about knowing and navigating for the
Yes.
corporate lawyer. It's
Yes.
about becoming the face and balancing it both sides for your country, for the client,
Yes.
and figuring out to ease it all out. So when somebody gets into India, the next most important thing that comes into the mind is cyber security and data protection, because the complex products coming in forms of technology and service sector could be the kind of data which is coming in. So India is still evolving, as I would say, in a data protection law, right? We aren't as strong as some of the other nations. We are evolving because we have our own share of issues to cater to. So how would you guide a client in that aspect? And what is it one should keep in mind as corporate lawyers for the best interest of the client?
So, just to
Investor.
start with a lighter note, I will say to all my investors, Jamtada se bach ke rehna. You know, as regards all these data privacy and digital scams are there. So, yeah. So having said that, and yes, we are still evolving, and for that matter, I will say that we have been able to sail through a substantial route, I would say, in terms of privacy laws and data protection laws and all. And but if you'll compare our regulatory regime with respect to European laws and all, and more particularly with respect to GDPR and all those mechanisms, we still need to work a lot in this sector. And yeah, and as far as protection of technology is concerned, there is one area, though I know the rationale and I can see the rationale. See, we still have this system of, protecting the softwares and the computer programs under the Copyright Act. And the rationale, and not under the Patents Act, as against, like, if you all know, US is protecting softwares and all those things under the patent law. But in India, we are still, giving protection under the Copyrights Act. The rationale probably is we want to protect expression of idea and not the idea itself. And that is what the copyright law says. That, the concept of copyright is that expression of the idea will be protected, not the idea or the end result. So that's what probably the intention is, not to protect to have some kind of monopoly over the ideation, not to have some kind of monopoly over the end result. But there are certain sectors, as I mentioned, which are heavily dependent upon the technology. There we may consider, protecting those aspects under the patent legislations and all.
Is there anything
Yeah.
specific you would like to add?
I have breezed by parts of our data protection law, which was, of course, promulgated in 2023. I don't think the government has yet established the data protection board. They're in the process of doing so, which is the so-called chief regulator / adjudicator under the regime. So yes, it is a very evolving jurisprudence, but my cursory sense, and I'm by no means a data privacy protection expert, is that it is too curative in nature.
Correct.
A data breach or an infraction of personal data, once it occurs, yes, there is a remedial means given under the Act, but the data that is lost has a snowballing effect. It percolates across, it can go to the dark web, Web 3.0, it can transgress boundaries instantaneously. So, the cat is out of the bag in that sense. So I personally thought that we need more preventive advocacy. We need more preventive means to ensure that it doesn't happen. Only the big data collecting companies have been entrusted, again, I could be corrected here, with the task of getting data audits. Are they the only company which are collecting your data? Today you have your banking is through apps, your travel arrangements are through apps, and they're all significant repositories of your data. And once there is a breach, the breach has happened. Curatively you can, impose some damages on them, but your personal data, which could include some very sensitive information, might have percolated to places and got in hands which are undesirable. So my view is, yes, I'm not on, government surveillance and all, that is a separate issue. But I thought that they could have had more preventive means as opposed to curative means.
Great, thank you. And one of the last topics that I would like to take in compliance is green initiatives and green investments and ESG, because sustainability is now the key topic across the world. There are green investments happening into India. We're looking at ESG norms to be complied with. But at the same time, Indian norms vis-a-vis some of the global partner norms are very, very different. So how do we pitch in and ensure that the client is aware of the differences? And are there any, like fintech, for example, you would have moved into some compliances there because they're very, very active in that ESG space, as well as some green investment options. So how would you, cater to international investors' requirement and help them ease in terms of understanding the Indian norms?
So when it comes to ESG, green finance, all those kind of things, we do have some regulators like RBI who are releasing papers on it, who are initiating the discussion on it. But if you ask me specifically in terms of the environment, the social norms or the other norms, you see, our frameworks are still, when we talk to a foreign investor about these issues, the levels of compliances that they are required in other countries versus what they're required in India, it's for them is very different. I wouldn't say that they're less, but they are very different. They come with the perception that there isn't anything that they're required to do, but that's not the case.
That's changing, I would say. Yeah.
That's changed. That's changed in the last, say, 7 years, right? So we have to, as advisors, we educate them that this is the system. And but you see, internationally, multinational corporations are coming up with really strong ESG policies. And when they set up subsidiaries abroad now, they expect this Indian head or the Indian CEO to implement those policies in that country. So we do get a lot of inquiries on how they can, bring in that aspect to their business. It's heartening to see. And this is the wave that the Indian government has to catch to surf the ESG
Get to
wave.
parity to some of the norms.
Play to the foreign investors. Absolutely. If you play to them, you give them the right policy to implement ESG, they will jump into the wagon, they're ready, they're looking forward to it. It's just about giving them the right atmosphere. For now, when they do green investments or talk about ESG, we tell them, you need to bake those SLAs, those requirements into your contract. Because right now your requirements are so specific, I cannot tell you just comply with this law. No. Correct. Bake it into your contract, create mechanisms for review, quarterly review, don't keep it at the last annual review. Be more proactive in evaluating whether what you want is actually being done. So reporting becomes very important. And if these aspects are looked into, I think this has high scope for growth in the midterm, if not in the short term.
And I would like to add here something. And now again, going back to the title of the session, which says that, role of a corporate lawyer to make India as an investment destination. So friends, and I can see a lot of law students here. And considering the subtopic which we are talking about is ESG. So friends, there is a lot of scope. And if you want to get into this practice area, then we are evolving, and we are almost on the verge of getting all these policies with respect to ESG and all implemented in India. And when I say these would be implemented, these would not be implemented in a very superficial manner. Now the situation has changed. Now, even all these foreign investors, they are very, very sensitive about actual compliance of ESG norms. And for that matter, I would say that, even there are many international indexes and all, they consider, they put those companies in the basket which are actually complying with the ESG norms and all. And if you'll see in 2020, Tesla was dropped from the S&P 500 index only because it was identified that there are certain issues with respect to work ethics and work culture and the working conditions. And other companies like ExxonMobil and all, they managed to survive in the index, but Tesla dropped. So, of course, Elon Musk made allegations that, it was something probably there was some kind of manipulations and all, and it was overrated and all those things. But yes, we are getting into that sensitive mode, and it will be implemented in a very serious manner.
Great.
So yeah.
Thank you. I think it's been quite an interesting discussion to see that how complicated a role it is when a corporate lawyer pitches in terms of getting investments in. It's not smooth because we need inputs in terms of knowing about the policies, the taxations. The areas to work on, as we see, is hugely on cybersecurity, data protection. That's not evolved at the pace that we think. Encouraging is the ESG part. The work is much faster, and the compliances seem to be looking to come to parity in few years to come. I think so. That's been interesting. I think Arush wants to say something.
No, I just want to give, because I do see a lot of law students over here. Back in the day, before we had our economic reforms about 33, 34 years ago, we all were just lawyers, and lawyers would generally just go to court. The concept of a transactional / corporate lawyer emerged and really blossomed in the 90s, and then went on to another tangent after 2000. Today, when you ask somebody, that you just don't ask that you're a lawyer. What is your practice area expertise? But I want to take that one step further. Whilst you develop and hone your skills in a particular practice area, it might benefit you, given the complexities that all my corporate lawyer friends are talking about, to actually be an industry-specific lawyer, a sector-specific lawyer. You could do some mastery in one particular sector. Like I am into real estate, right from project infrastructure, finance, RERA compliance, litigation, ADR, whatever it is. I think that will also give the client a sense of, you don't need to do it entirely yourself, but cultivate a culture in and around your office to be more sector specific as opposed to being practice area specific. Because that lends a lot of uniformity in the advice you will give. It'll streamline your own practice area and maybe cultivates a better sense of command over it, and it'll give your client a lot of confidence. So I genuinely feel that the role of a corporate lawyer, yes, we need our area of expertise, but you shouldn't restrict it to a particular area. No, I do capital markets, I do tax. No. Have one or two industries where you wield a sense of expertise. Yes.
I
Before
would
it
agree
starts
to that as well.
sounding
because
preachy.
Hearing itself that how complex the role of getting investments can be, having an expertise in a particular area will only help you understand the taxations or the security issues or the PLIs linked with it. Because the topic itself is so enormous in its roots that one will have to get expertise in that. Will also take a couple of years for you to understand, and the policies are forever changing too, because there'll be something new which has come in, there's something which will be just left out, and then you're looking at compliances with respect to even global investor requirements, right? Because you have to match it up so that it is a comfort zone for them. So yeah, with that I think we should.
Yeah. So I'll just take 15 seconds more for my student friends here, and with respect to the role of corporate lawyers in making India as investment destination. There is a book called as Corporate Chanakya. In the first 6-7 pages itself, he talks about, he says that whenever you are starting a business, there are two professional friends you have. One is chartered accountant, and second is lawyers. So this is something which I wanted to bring to the notice of student friends here. You will find it very encouraging. There are a lot of avenues, there are a lot of openings, and we'll together grow and take this profession to a greater height. Thank you so much.